Shake brings all the boys to the yard, and they're like, it's better than yours.
It's getting hot in here, so hot, so take off all your clothes.
For decades, Pharrell Williams has occupied a rare space in the music industry. Not just respected, but protected. He became more than an artist. He became an image, smiling, optimistic, eternally youthful. A symbol of creativity without scandal, success without decay. Someone who seemed untouched by the darker mechanics of the business he helped dominate. That image is why what is happening now has unsettled so many people. Pharrell Williams is not being sued by a former employee, not by a disgruntled collaborator, not by someone looking for relevance online. He is being sued in federal court by Chad Hugo, the man who stood beside him for more than 3 decades, the other half of the Neptunes. Chad Hugo has never been a public figure in the traditional sense. He rarely gave interviews. He never tried to control the narrative. While Pharrell became the face, Chad remained in the background, in the studio, behind the sound, away from the spotlight. And he stayed there quietly, for years, until now. In his lawsuit, Chad Hugo does not claim a misunderstanding. He does not describe a breakdown in communication. He does not say the partnership simply drifted apart. He accuses Pharrell Williams of fraudulent and malicious conduct. Those are not emotional accusations. They are legal ones, and they are specific. According to the filing, Chad Hugo alleges that money owed to him was diverted, that financial records were concealed, that he was denied access to the books of companies he helped build, that revenue from music, merchandising, and other ventures stopped flowing to him without explanation. Most disturbingly, he claims that songs he worked on no longer appear in his royalty portals, the systems that track usage and determine payment. Not delayed, not underreported, simply absent. In an industry where payment is automated and traceable, absence is not a minor error. If a song does not appear, it cannot generate income for the person who owns it. And without access to internal records, there is no way to know where that money went. Chad also alleges that since 2021, he has been blocked from reviewing financial information entirely. That for years, he requested transparency from businesses he co-founded and was denied. This is not a junior partner claiming mistreatment. This is not an artist unfamiliar with contracts. This is the man who helped define the sound of an era. And that context matters, because the Neptunes were not a brief phenomenon. They were not a trend. At their peak, they shaped what popular music sounded like across pop, hip-hop, and R&B simultaneously. Their work generated massive, continuous revenue, not just from records, but from licensing, branding, touring, and long-term catalog exploitation. When someone at that level says money went missing, the implications are not small. The lawsuit goes further. Chad Hugo alleges self-dealing, business decisions made to benefit one partner at the expense of another. He alleges concealment of material information, meaning financial details that he was legally entitled to see were withheld. And he alleges that this conduct was intentional, not accidental. That distinction is critical, because Chad is not simply asking to be repaid. He is seeking punitive damages, the kind awarded when a court believes misconduct was deliberate enough to warrant punishment, not just correction. But perhaps the most revealing element of the filing is how Chad describes his own role. He does not frame himself as a background contributor. He describes himself as the principal composer, arranger, multi-instrumentalist, programmer, and sound designer behind the Neptunes' work. In other words, not someone present, but someone foundational. When that claim is placed next to the allegation that control over business operations, contracts, and financial systems rested elsewhere, a power imbalance becomes visible. One person shaping the music, another shaping the money, and that imbalance raises a question the industry rarely asks out loud. If one partner controlled the sound and the other controlled the structure, who truly controlled the outcome? This lawsuit is not just about a broken partnership. It is about authorship, access, and power, about who had visibility and who didn't. And it does not exist in isolation, because years before Chad Hugo filed this lawsuit, someone else tried to raise similar concerns. Someone who was dismissed. Someone whose warnings were easy to ignore. To understand why this case matters now, you have to look backward to the first person who said something was wrong, long before anyone was ready to listen. To understand why this lawsuit carries real weight, you have to understand the scale of what the Neptunes actually were. They were not just successful producers. They were not riding a moment. They were not interchangeable hitmakers. For a stretch of the early 2000s, they were the infrastructure of popular music. Their sound wasn't dominant in one lane. It was everywhere at once. Pop, hip-hop, R&B, radio, clubs, award shows. If a record was unavoidable, chances were they had a hand in it. That level of presence generates more than visibility. It generates systems, publishing income, performance royalties, licensing, merchandising, long-term catalog revenue that continues long after the original release cycle ends, which is why Chad Hugo's allegations are not about small discrepancies. They are about sustained income streams tied to work that is still being monetized today. According to the lawsuit, Chad alleges that Pharrell Williams engaged in self-dealing, meaning decisions were made that benefited one partner financially while disadvantaging another. He also alleges concealment of material information, which in legal terms means financial details that a partner is entitled to or withheld. This matters because partnerships are not based on trust alone. They are based on access. If one partner controls the flow of information, they control the reality the other partner sees. And that control becomes most dangerous when it intersects with how music money is tracked. Every songwriter and producer relies on royalty portals, systems that log usage across radio, streaming, television, and commercial licensing. These portals determine what you are paid and why. If a song appears, it can be audited. If it does not, it effectively does not exist from a payment standpoint. Chad alleges that numerous works he contributed to do not appear in his portals at all. Not flagged, not delayed, not miscategorized, missing. If true, that is not a technical glitch. It means revenue is being generated somewhere without reaching the person entitled to it. And without access to internal financial records, there is no way to trace where that revenue is going. The lawsuit further claims that since 2021, Chad has been denied access to company financials entirely. Years of requests, according to the filing, met with resistance rather than disclosure. That point is critical, because this is not a dispute between strangers. It is not an artist fighting a label. It is a co-founder asking to see the books of a business he helped build. And that brings us to the most consequential part of Chad's claim: how he defines his role inside the Neptunes. In the filing, Chad describes himself as the principal composer, arranger, multi-instrumentalist, programmer, and sound designer. That is not branding language. It is a functional description of labor. In simple terms, he is saying that the musical architecture, the melodies, structures, textures, and sonic identity flowed primarily through him. When that claim is placed next to allegations that business control, deal-making, and financial oversight rested elsewhere, the imbalance becomes structural rather than personal. One partner shapes the creative output, the other shapes the financial framework. And in industries where visibility and charisma influence negotiations, the person who becomes the public face often gains leverage beyond what is written on paper. Branding matters. Public recognition matters. Being the person labels call matters. But when branding power overlaps with financial control, accountability becomes fragile. This is not an accusation that one person deserved more credit than the other. It is a question of governance, of access, of whether creative labor and financial authority were ever aligned, or whether one quietly absorbed the other. And if that imbalance existed inside one of the most successful partnerships in modern music, it raises a deeper concern. Because systems don't collapse overnight. They reveal themselves when someone finally demands to see inside. Which brings us to the part of this story that predates the lawsuit entirely. Because long before Chad Hugo asked for transparency in court, another artist said she was promised clarity and discovered too late that she never had it. That voice was ignored at the time. Now, it sounds less like an outlier and more like an early warning. Long before Chad Hugo walked into a federal courtroom asking for transparency, another artist tried to say something was wrong. In 2020, Kelis spoke publicly about her experience working with the Neptunes. She did not release a legal filing. She did not hide behind statements. She spoke directly, emotionally, and without the language of lawyers. At the time, that worked against her. She said she had been lied to. She said she had been swindled. She said publishing was taken. She said rights were taken. She said money was taken. The people she accused were not anonymous executives or faceless labels. They were the two men who shaped her sound at the very beginning of her career. The men she trusted when she was 19 years old. The response was immediate and dismissive. She was labeled bitter. She was called difficult. She was told she did not understand contracts. Her claims were reduced to personality, emotion, and resentment. The industry moved on, but the details she shared never fully disappeared. Kelis entered the music industry young. She was not surrounded by independent legal counsel. She was not operating from a position of leverage. According to her, she was verbally promised an even split. 1/3 for her, 1/3 for Pharrell, 1/3 for Chad. Equal partners, shared ownership. She signed based on that understanding. Years later, she says she discovered something that made no sense. Despite releasing albums produced entirely by the Neptunes, despite touring, despite having a defining hit, she claims she earned nothing from her album sales. Not less than expected, not delayed, nothing. When she asked where the money was, she says the response was not clarification or reconciliation. It was paperwork. You signed it. That sentence matters because it reveals a familiar structure. Verbal assurances on one side, contracts on the other, and silence when the two do not align. The clearest example of that imbalance is Milkshake. The song defined Kelis's career. It became inseparable from her identity as an artist. But legally, she does not control it. She performed it, but she does not own the composition or the production. That distinction determines everything. When Milkshake is licensed, sampled, or monetized, ownership, not performance, decides who benefits. So when the song was sampled years later on a major album, Kelis learned about it at the same time as the public. No conversation, no notice, no obligation to ask. Legally, nothing improper occurred. But for Kelis, it confirmed what she believed had happened all along. She described it as theft. She described it as manipulation. And she pointed directly at Pharrell. At the time, her words were dismissed as emotional overreach. People argued she misunderstood the business. Others said she was attacking success out of frustration. But now, Chad Hugo is describing missing money, hidden information, and restricted access from inside the same creative ecosystem. And the similarities are difficult to ignore. Kelis says she was promised transparency and received contracts instead. Chad says he was entitled to transparency and was locked out instead. Kelis says she did not know money was missing because touring and visibility masked the absence. Chad says he did not know songs were missing until lawyers examined the systems. Kelis says when she questioned the arrangement, she was dismissed. Chad says when he asked to see the books, he was denied. Different roles, different leverage, same structure. And this is where the story quietly shifts. When Kelis made her accusations, she directed them at the Neptunes as a unit. That framing made sense at the time. They were a duo, a single brand, a single authority. But Chad Hugo is now saying that he himself was denied access, information, and revenue, which forces an uncomfortable reassessment. If Chad was not the one controlling the business side, if he was focused on creation while someone else handled contracts, negotiations, and financial systems, then the power dynamics of those earlier years look different. That does not absolve anyone, but it reframes responsibility. Because if Chad Hugo is now describing financial opacity from inside the partnership, then Kelis's experience no longer looks like an isolated dispute between an artist and producers. It looks like an early encounter with a system where information flowed in one direction, and where the people without control over structure learned the truth only after the money stopped making sense. Kelis did not win a lawsuit. She did not reclaim ownership. She did not receive public validation. She left. She built a life outside the industry. She redirected her energy elsewhere. And for years, her story remained an uncomfortable footnote people preferred not to examine. Until now. Because when a partner of 3 decades steps forward describing the same opacity, the same barriers, and the same silence, it becomes harder to dismiss the first person who spoke up. It becomes harder to call it bitterness. And it raises a question that goes beyond any single contract. If these dynamics existed at the top of one of the most successful production empires in modern music, what did they look like for everyone else? And who, if anyone, actually had the power to see the whole picture? There is still one person who might help answer that question. He has been present the entire time. He has standing on paper. And so far, he has said nothing at all. There is one person who has been present throughout this entire story, whose position on paper gives him visibility, and whose silence now carries weight. Shay Haley. He has never been loud. He has never been confrontational. He has never tried to claim ownership of the spotlight. For decades, he has existed alongside the Neptunes and Nerd, as a steady presence in visuals, performances, and brand identity. But according to the structures referenced around this dispute, Shay Haley is not just a background figure. He is a partner, a co-owner, someone who, at least in theory, should have access to the same financial transparency as the others. And yet, he has said nothing. No public defense, no statement of support, no denial, no clarification. In situations like this, silence is not proof of guilt or innocence, but it is rarely meaningless. If the accusations were baseless, a denial would cost little. If the story were fabricated, correcting the record would protect everyone involved. If the dispute were minor, minimizing it would be easy. Instead, there is quiet, and that quiet has had an effect beyond the people named in the lawsuit. Because when a partner accuses another partner of hiding money, withholding access, and controlling information, it sends a signal through the industry. Not publicly, but privately. Accountants get calls. Old contracts get reviewed. Royalty portals get checked. Questions that were postponed for years get asked in silence. Nothing confirmed. Nothing announced. Just movement. And then there is Pharrell Williams himself. So far, there has been no emotional response. No public statement addressing the substance of the allegations. Only formal legal positioning and distance. From a strategic standpoint, that approach makes sense. Pharrell's public image has always been his strongest shield. Optimism, stability, the sense that he exists above conflict. Engaging directly risks altering that perception. Silence allows the brand to hold. But this time, silence does not function the way it used to. Because Chad Hugo is not a distant accuser. He is not someone from the margins. He is the person who helped build the work that made the image possible. And Chad is not asking for reconciliation. He is not asking for acknowledgement. He is asking the court to intervene and to punish. That distinction matters. Punitive damages are not about balance. They are about intent. They are requested when someone believes misconduct was not accidental, but deliberate. Whether that claim holds up is for the court to decide. But the fact that it has been made in this context cannot be undone. This is where the story circles back to Kelis. Years ago, she spoke without legal language, without institutional backing, without protection. She was dismissed as emotional, difficult, unprofessional. She left the industry instead of fighting it. Now, years later, a founding partner is using the language of law to describe a structure that feels uncomfortably familiar. Different voice, different leverage, same concern. And that contrast exposes something deeper than any single lawsuit. It reveals how credibility is assigned, who is believed, who is ignored, and how long systems can operate without scrutiny when the people inside them are unwilling or unable to speak. This case will end. There will be filings, motions, possibly settlements, statements written by lawyers, carefully chosen words that close the legal record. But what does not disappear as easily is the question now sitting with everyone who ever worked within that orbit. If this could happen at the top, between partners with history, power, and shared success, what happened to those who had less? The younger artists, the quieter collaborators, the people who trusted verbal assurances in rooms where contracts mattered more. The music still plays, The songs still work. The legacy still exists. But once the machinery behind it is questioned, it becomes harder to hear it the same way. And maybe that is the real outcome here. Not a verdict, not a headline, but a pause. A moment where the industry is forced to look inward, not at the art, but at the structures that decide who benefits from it. Because patterns do not announce themselves. They reveal themselves only when someone finally asks to see the whole picture.